Good morning, Pim.
Hi, good morning.
Real pleasure to have this discussion with you today. And by the way, as well, congratulations for the publication in Polish of your stellar book.
Thank you very much. Really cool that it's now also available in a language that I completely cannot understand.
Yes, well, I have to share with you that I arrived in Poland 4 months ago, and the language is quite a challenge to get it. Anyway, thank you for being with us today, and I would like a bit to discuss with you, obviously on the book, but more on the principle and the idea. So let me maybe start about, you know, all those principles or those changes that you see and you describe in your book. Do you see that as a revolution or an evolution?
I think it depends. As you can imagine, as corporate rebels, we love to talk about revolution. But the companies that we've researched over the past couple of years that have made really radical transformations in how they are working and how they approach organizing all of the work for their employees has also often been in a way of evolution, not by changing everything in a very quick, sudden moment, but to really gradually make step-by-step transformations to create a workplace that's much more free, where hierarchy is way less present, and this. So sometimes it goes step by step. And of course, the past year, we've seen some more revolution type changes. But before that, I think it can happen both ways. If you want to go the revolution path, you also need somebody who's really daring and bold and who is able to make these adventurous decisions and risky decisions as well.
And yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I mean, in my case, for Orange Poland, clearly, how much I would love to see a revolution, as much as I think as a CEO, you know, you have to balance the business continuity and I will say moving forward and toward you know, an evolution of the culture. Another thing that I would be curious to hear from you on, you know, all your kind of principle of change, from hierarchy to less hierarchy to, you know, control to freedom, all those different things. What you believe, or what you have observed with all your travel, will be the first to start with, or do you believe it's a mix of all of those which need to be addressed from the beginning of those type of cultural change?
Well, I think it's hard to change just one thing or to pick the one thing that you need to change. Because if you talk about changing an organization from a hierarchical structure with the CEO on top and lots of management layers in between. So if you change from this fixed hierarchical structure to a more loose network structure where teams act as if they are their own kind of businesses within the larger organization, you also have to change the way that you control an organization. You have to let go of some of those standard control mechanisms that many companies still have in place. You also need to create more transparency around performance, around how people are doing, how teams are performing. So it's almost impossible to change one of these elements because they're so interconnected. And if you start working on one, you'll easily figure out that you'll also have to change the other elements. And even, especially if you, like what you mentioned, if it's hard for a company, it's too risky for a company to go on the revolution path. Making it this change in a more evolutionary way makes much more sense. And then starting with one element that you feel you desperately need to change. And then along the way, while you start changing that, you'll figure out that you need to change many more things in the way you're structured as an organization.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, obviously, we are here today because you know you have your book, and on my side, I will say I'm. Before having read your book, I was practicing, let's say, some of your ideas because they are, you know, seen somehow as you have done it in some companies. So you know, it's not something. It's in the air, and obviously you have been able to very well capture it in, you know, in a synthetic way. But there is still things from my position that, you know, I will not know what to do, and I would like, you know, to share with you is one side is especially for kind of corporate, because you are addressing the corporate world. You know, we are subject to a lot of kind of supervision from outside, not from inside. You know, I'm talking about, you know, regulatory. I'm talking about if you are a listed company, compliance, all these things. And, you know, in a less control organization, this is a bit conflicting. I mean, I do believe in the power of releasing control, but equally from the outside world, you know, we are very regulated and we are very much controlled, and you must be accountable. And if something go wrong, you must be able to kind of trace back where the failure is coming from. So, you know, this is one thing that I think, you know, we really need to be adapted, and probably on both sides. Probably as well from a regulation, you know, compliance, how it can be in the new world of more freedom. That's one point. And another point, which is, you know, probably not worth to talk on the long term, but in the short term, you know, you will have those discussions about salary. You will have those discussions about title, about status. That, you know, for companies that has been established for years, for people who have done a career to climb up the ladder for 30 years to reach, you know, the director, whatever level, I think it will be quite a complex journey to transform to this new model. So, you know, have you seen companies that have been able, I mean, traditional company, because new company, we know, if you build from the DNA from the start, you can deal with it. But what about companies that are 20 years old, 30 years old, you know, who have employees who have done half of their lifetime in a model? Have you seen such company doing it radically, or?
Yeah, so first, I think it's interesting to dive into what you're saying. So you're the CEO of a large company in Poland, right? 15,000 employees, am I right? So the interesting thing, if you talk to a lot of people in organizations, they always say, well, I'm not the CEO, so I cannot really make any change in the organization. But the interesting thing is that they overlook that CEOs have the feeling that they can easily change companies. So they're seen as these almighty people that can easily go about and make changes to the organization, whatever change they want. And it's interesting to see from your response and from many other people that we talk to that this is not the case. So CEOs are not these dictatorial people that have so much power that they can control what is going on in every single part of the organization. I think that's good to understand, because everybody working in organizations has the feeling that they cannot change the system. Whether they're the CEO or a frontline employee or an outside controlling party, or everybody feels that they're in this system that we cannot change. But the interesting thing is organizations are not really a tangible thing. We've created them as a tool to collaborate and to work together with one another to achieve things. So they're these non-existing things. Yeah, they exist on paper, but not in reality. You can't really touch them. So that means that we can also change them to whatever form or entity we want. The challenge, as you mentioned already, is how can we do that? How can we actually create change if you have so many conflicting interests, if you have so many forces, both from within and outside the organization, that kind of force you to continue working like you've always worked. And the interesting thing is that the companies that we've been researching, whether they have been started like that from scratch, as you mentioned, of course it's easier. You can design the whole culture, the whole way of working from scratch. So it's easier to already construct it in a way that feels more. But when changing traditional organizations that have maybe worked for decades like this, it's of course way harder. If you have the shareholders breathing down your neck to make sure that your quarterly returns are always going up, if you have lots of people that are controlling in government positions, for example, the organization, people need to be, as you mentioned, accountable, etc. But the beauty is it can change. So we've seen organizations that have already been around for 80 years with sometimes even 80,000 employees that have been able to transform from this super traditional and working environments with very traditional top-down management structures. They have been able to transform into these new working models where people have much more freedom. And I think the interesting thing is that it shouldn't start, or in my opinion, shouldn't start with too much of these big changes where you often hear about these stories, right? Where CEOs come in and they change the company, and within 1 year, it's a completely new organization. I think this is a utopia. It doesn't happen. Very rarely, maybe it happens, but most of the time it starts with lots of experimentation. So start in one part of the organization that is already maybe a bit more bold, a bit more pioneering, and see how you can kind of separate that part of the organization and experiment with these new types of working to understand what works for your organization, to keep the risk to a minimum, but still be able to have these radical workplace experiments. I think this really works, and then you can scale it to a bigger extent. And I can imagine also in your organization, some of these things are already happening in different pockets, right?
Yeah. No, I do agree with you that, I mean, I did that in my previous role in a smaller organization, but still the same that we chose one department, one, building, and we change everything. And in fact, what is happening is that, you introduce an external somehow, something in the system, and the rest, suddenly they see the outcome of these good things and they want to be part of it. So it's a kind of a snowball mechanism where you introduce something, it works or not, but let's imagine it works. And then the things is rolling, and the one that, didn't want to step in or very skeptical that you knew from the beginning, they are forced at the end. When they become a minority, they are stepping in. So it's a beautiful way, to induce a change. Maybe one topic.
And how do you do that in your organization? Like you're now the CEO of this large company in Poland.
Yes.
What are some of the ways that you kind of ignite this change in parts of the organization?
Yeah. So I've been CEO of this organization for 4 months now. I started in September. Obviously, COVID is making the induction a bit slower, but nevertheless, I will relate a bit of what I did previously to share with you. So I do believe change has to come from the bottom of the company, but need to be inspired by the top. Meaning that I consider myself as a CEO, I have very limited power in the sense of doing things. So I can inspire, so I need to lead by example. All my career, I think if I have to keep one value that I have is lead by example. You cannot expect, a system, as you describe a company, to move in a direction if the people they are looking for is not himself moving in this direction. So, a very basic things, I think we should be more relaxed, more fun. So it starts by being a CEO that, you know, is acting like this. Otherwise, you cannot have the people stepping in. So I think it's really about this. I think it's about, a lot is about giving, I will not call it freedom, but giving, you know, responsibility and autonomy to the people, because then they will be the agent of change. If they don't have this, you know, they will still be in the mode to execute what someone is telling them. So I think those are, I do believe a lot, at least in our case, but maybe we are a bit specific, that the working environment, the design of a location is as well very fundamental to change. And the last things I always said, and people were scared when I was saying that, I was saying in order to change, we need to inspire fear in the company, because we need to create an environment where people will have reason to go outside their comfort zone. None of us, if we don't have something coming that is painful, we are going to change anything. We will say, yes, good idea, but why to change? What is, you know, the incentive for me, the gain that I will get by changing? And if you have a pain, you might start to, you know, do sport. If your doctor is telling you that you should do sport in order to feel better, you might finally go to the gym. So I really believe in this. And, you know, obviously, for example, COVID, leave it aside all, I mean, the horrible, and, you know, for sure, I wish it would never have happened, but it is here. And I think this is one of those change agents that can help us. And we should take this opportunity as a company, you know, to leverage on this, to surf this wave of working from home, all this. And what I was saying in another day in a forum, they were asking me, you know, what is for you the main takeout of COVID? And I said, I think we became more human as a company. And the reason I was saying that is because suddenly we enter each other's house and we discover cats and kids around our colleague, which, you know, before you knew a colleague, and maybe if you had some coffee discussion, you knew a bit about his family and all of this. But now with the COVID, the Zoom, the Skype, and all of those, we went each other in our house. And suddenly, you know, a kid was appearing, a cat was jumping, and it made us all more human. Because, you know, we dressed down during this crisis. Most of the people, suddenly, they didn't have a suit. The director didn't have the prestige. Because behind the screen, we all have the same tool. You know, I don't have a big office. I don't have a big office to impress someone. I just have a screen. So more human, for sure. This has helped us to be more human. And now the question is, when we will go back somehow to the office in a hybrid, whatever the mode, are we going to get back our dressing, or are we will be able to keep half of it? And that's a question.
Yeah, interesting question. I'm really curious to see how companies will respond to that. I really hope that it's going to be somewhere in between, or at least that organizations will start having proper conversations with employees, what it is that they actually want. Because I think this is one of the most often overlooked questions. We just come up with a policy and we stick to the policy, whatever happens and whatever people think. And now we've seen one extreme where you have people working in the office full time with a suit and tie in their fancy offices, showing their status and their career progression. And now we've seen, as you mentioned, like the other side where people are only working from home in their jumpers or in their hoodies indeed with their cats behind them or their dogs. So it's the completely different end of the spectrum. I don't think one is right or the other is right. It should be somewhere in the middle, depending on what it is that people need. And I think the big challenge is going to be, how can we get away from the idea that organizations need to come up with policies to tell people how work should, or what it should look like? And how can we actually involve people to create their own ideal workplace? Whether that's full-time in the office or full-time at home or somewhere in between. Let's leave that up to people. They're all responsible adults that can perfectly make important decisions in every part of their life. So give them the opportunity and the freedom to do so. And I think it is important, as you already also touched upon, it should be about a balance between this freedom to design your own work and your own work life, and combine it with a high level of responsibility. Because often when organizations talk about making work more fun or making work better, it's often about giving more freedom. So unlimited holidays, set your own working hours, set your own salary, these crazy levels of freedom, but they don't balance it with the right responsibility. So if you can take off as much days per year as you want, you should also think what kind of an impact that has on your colleagues, on the performance of your team. And if you really want people to behave as responsible adults at work, you shouldn't just give them the freedom, but you should also give them the responsibility, so they really feel that their decisions are important in how they're being successful at work and how they're developing their own working life to the perfect situation.
Yeah.
Very briefly, one personal question I'd like to ask. We touched upon the status and upon the office and the difference between working from home and in the office, also in terms of status. One very painful topic for many leaders is what we've seen in many progressive organizations, is that these leaders get rid of their status symbols. So they get rid of their reserved parking spot. They get rid of their fancy corner office on the top floor with nice carpet and expensive art. And they do that to be closer to people, to have more equality in the workplace, etc., etc. What do you think when you go back? I don't know if you have any big office at the moment. And if you have so, I think you haven't been there before because you've been working from home entirely. But would you be able to give that up and to be more amongst the people instead of in such an office if you have one? Completely.
I mean, for me, this is, as I was saying, leading by example to inspire the people who actually will do the transformation. Because, me, I'm one CEO. There is, thousands of employees. So I cannot, even if I change myself, I can only inspire the people to do this snowball that we discussed at the beginning. So completely, I mean, no offices, or at least, because, as we said as well, we are not alone, we have a client. People expect as well from a company like us to have a certain standard. But, my view is that, the floor of the executive floor, as it is called, should be an open place, where actually the people should come to see and share with the CEO. So you need to make this environment inviting the people and not scaring the people that, oh my God, I'm on the last floor. I should dress properly, and so on. So yeah, clearly, I mean, again, for me, this is, leading by example. If you don't start with this, you have no credibility.
Yeah, fully agreed. And I think it's these very small elements can be super important, powerful as they are so symbolic, as you mentioned.
Great, Pim. I think we have exhausted our time. Probably we could go for hours, I suppose. We share very much some of the same principle and idea. Again, congratulations for your book. And I'm pretty sure, if I might say, with the pandemic, your book is really spot on, and a lot of people will get inspired by what is inside. So congratulations.
Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed talking to you about the topic.
Yes.
I hope it in Poland kind of organizes a revolution, a workplace revolution, and would be good to see that at Orange as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.